I was born a Newfoundlander, and a Newfoundlander I have been all my life, and a Newfoundlander I will die.
The death of a Canadian political legend. The last remaining father of Confederation, Joey Smallwood, dies in Newfoundland. Good morning, I'm Jane Gilbert, here with the CBC Morning News, and we're live from Newsworld, Halifax.
Good morning, I'm Jordy Morgan. One of the men who helped forge the Canada-U.S. Free Trade Agreement says the Americans aren't playing fair. We'll talk to Gordon Ritchie a little later this hour, but first, today's top story. Jane.
Thanks, Jordy. Former Newfoundland Premier Joey Smallwood died last night at his home near St. John's. He was 90 years old. The exact cause of death was not immediately disclosed, but Smallwood had been in failing health in recent years. Smallwood was best known as the man who led Newfoundland into Confederation. Dan Bjarnason takes a look at the career of one of Canada's most colorful politicians.
Joey Smallwood not only changed his beloved Newfoundland, he changed his new country. He made it larger. He was the product of the hard life of the outports, with their poverty and their isolation. Smallwood came to know a wider world when he became a union organizer on the railway, then a newspaper reporter, and then a broadcaster. Newfoundland was bankrupt in the 30s and was ruled from Britain. By 1945, both were ready for change. In a referendum, Newfoundlanders voted by only 52% to join Canada. It was a bitter campaign in which Smallwood led the Confederation forces, and to no one's great surprise, Joey Smallwood became the new province's first premier. He would go on to win 5 more elections. Industrial development, he insisted, was the key to breaking the cycle of poverty in the province. He pushed his expensive schemes, but most were disappointments. In 1971, though, the Liberal tide went out. Smallwood was defeated after 6 terms. But he never strayed far from public view. He wrote books about Newfoundland history, an ambitious encyclopedia of Newfoundland, and a book, of course, about himself. He once said, "History will remember me well because I'll write it."
I'm a proud and grateful Canadian, but I was born a Newfoundlander, and a Newfoundlander I have been all my life, and a Newfoundlander I will die.
That report from the CBC's Dan Bjarnason.
General Motors in the United States is about to announce plans to close some of its plants. A Detroit newspaper has named already 2 plants that are expected to be shut. Rubinger Levine of NBC News takes a look at why the company has fallen on hard times.
General Motors is the biggest company in the U.S., and it has been hit by some of the recession's biggest problems. In the latest sales figures, GM suffered another decline. GM auto sales down 5.3%, truck sales down almost 8%. The company lost more than $1 billion from July through September, historically a period of robust sales. And even with the company's heavy bet on a wider collection of models for the 1992 model year than in the past, the company could lose more than $7 billion for all of this year. GM has seen its share of the car market shrink from 40% in the early 1980s to 35% now, largely the result of sales lost to lower-priced Japanese cars. Example, it takes 40 man-hours of work on average to produce a GM car, only 18 hours for the Japanese to build a Toyota. The main problem for GM and the other U.S. auto companies is that many Americans regard Japanese models as superior in quality to U.S. cars, and that is a perception that won't be easy to overcome. Irving R. Levine, NBC News, Washington.
General Motors in Canada is also making some changes to its operations, and it's believed one of the company's plants in Oshawa may be in jeopardy. Yesterday, the heads of GM in Canada and the Auto Workers Union met to try and figure out a way to save money at the plant. Jeffrey Kaufman has more on that story.
A little bit later, thank you. GM Canada President George Peoples came to the headquarters of the Canadian Auto Workers in search of common ground. For Auto Workers boss Bob White, rarely have the stakes been so high. The issue addressed is the competitiveness of GM's Oshawa car plant. GM management is clearly frustrated.
We were encouraged early on in the summer that we would be making some progress in many of these areas. But as the fall began to unfold, our progress bogged down.
For most of this year, the Oshawa plant has failed to meet its production goals. Since last spring, GM has been pushing for the right to impose mandatory overtime when production is lost because of delays and breakdown. It's common in GM's American plants, but the CAW is resisting. Bob White offered a compromise of voluntary overtime, but he concedes it may be too late.
The solving of this problem does not automatically guarantee that GM will put a product in the plant in 1994-95.
At stake is this assembly line in plant number 2 and the 4,200 people who make it work. GM has 4 plants like this in North America. It's anticipated that one will be closed in 3 years' time. Because Canadians produce more GM cars than they buy, there's pressure to close a Canadian plant. The competitiveness issue has added to that pressure. For CBC News, I'm Jeffrey Kaufman.
The president of South Korea, No Tai-woo, announced this morning that his country is now free of nuclear weapons, and he challenged North Korea to make the entire peninsula a nuclear-free zone. It's believed the United States had about 100 nuclear weapons stored in a base just south of the capital city of South Korea, Seoul. This morning's announcement confirms earlier reports that Washington had pulled those weapons out of the country. The Soviet Union, founded 74 years ago, will not exist after January the 1st, 1992. The Soviet Union will dissolve to be replaced by the new Commonwealth of Independent States set up by Russian President Boris Yeltsin. The decision was confirmed yesterday by Yeltsin and by National President Mikhail Gorbachev. Today, the American Secretary of State, James Baker, will visit 2 of the founding members of the new independent Commonwealth. We get more on that from Ben Brown of the BBC.
This is almost certainly James Baker's last trip around the Soviet Union. Next time he's here, it will be called the Commonwealth of Independent States. It's why he's devoting so much time and energy to traveling in the republics which will form the nucleus of that Commonwealth. But already serious divisions are appearing between them. Nursultan Nazarbayev, the leader of Kazakhstan, who Mr. Baker met yesterday, has said that he's not prepared to let Russia become the only republic with nuclear weapons, and that for the meantime, therefore, Kazakhstan will have to keep its missiles. Today, Mr. Baker moves on to 2 other republics with nuclear weapons, Belarus and Ukraine, the Slavic states which helped to found the Commonwealth. Only a few days ago, there was pressure on Mr. Baker to grant American recognition of Ukrainian independence. Now Russia and Belarus want it as well. And in a sense, events here are moving so fast that the issue of recognition has become slightly academic. America supports the fledgling Commonwealth as the best way forward, and by implication, that means Washington will have to recognize the independence of the individual states within that Commonwealth. Ben Brown, BBC News, Moscow.
The second round of Middle East peace talks will end in Washington today. Israel says its delegation will leave when today's meetings are over. The Israeli, Jordanian, and Palestinian delegations spent most of their time squabbling over one issue, and that was the Palestinian demand to negotiate with Israel alone instead of as part of the Jordanian delegation. Israel didn't want the talks held in Washington in the first place, and there is no agreement on when or where to convene a third round of talks. Back in this country, supporters of the Lubicon Indian Band in Alberta have organized a boycott of paper products made at a pulp mill owned by Daishawa. The group says the company wants to harvest trees growing on Indian land. It is hoped that the boycott will force the federal government to settle a land claim in dispute for more than 50 years. Rick Boguski reports.
Daishawa is a giant international pulp and paper company. It operates a plant near Peace River and lays claim to 40,000 square kilometers of trees in northern Alberta. Timberland right in the heart of the Lubicon's traditional hunting territory, land the Lubicon say is theirs.
The federal government is responsible to negotiate, but the federal government doesn't listen to Indians. The federal government doesn't listen to Albertans. The federal government doesn't listen to Canadians. And our intent is to put pressure on Daishawa because the federal government will listen to Daishawa.
Because money talks?
Money talks.
We're being portrayed as villains in this dispute, which we're powerless to resolve.
Amoka says the national boycott of Daishawa's products won't hurt his company because 95% of his products are sold in Japan. But he warns this action could backfire. Daishawa says it's trying not to inflame the situation by staying out of the disputed land and logging elsewhere, at least for this logging season. But that's little consolation to these Lubicon supporters who see Daeshawa as the villain and plan to make the company pay.
Rick Boguski, CBC News, Edmonton.
In Vancouver, a Mennonite church and the Jewish community are in a bitter dispute over the church's defense of one of its members. That member is Jacob Leuschen. Leuschen worked for the Nazis while he lived in Holland, but he didn't tell that to immigration officials when he moved to Canada. The Canadian government wants him deported, but his Mennonite church says he should be forgiven. Carol Thorbs reports.
For the last 7 years, this Mennonite church has been an important part of Jacob Leuschen's life. In fact, the former UBC instructor lives just down the road from the church. These days, Leuschen's is rarely seen in public. Last month, the Federal Court of Canada found him guilty of entering Canada illegally by hiding his Nazi past. He was stripped of his citizenship after being here for 30 years. Canada's Immigration Department is now considering deporting Leuschen's back to his native country, Holland. His church wants him to stay. In a religious paper called The Christian News, the senior pastor of the First United Mennonite Church was quoted as saying that Jacob Leuschen's is a very loved member of this congregation and should be allowed to live out his life in his adopted country. But Pastor Hans Federer wasn't willing to repeat those comments on camera. Many members of the Jewish community are concerned about the support for Leuschen's. In a letter written to the Mennonite Central Committee of BC, leaders of the Jewish group B'nai B'rith are asking the church to reconsider its support for Leuschen's. The letter says, Mr. Leuschen's good record in Canada over the years and his membership in your church for 35 years are irrelevant to the fact of his crime and his culpability. Mr. Leuschen's does not merit residence in this country. Carol Thorbs, CBC News, Vancouver.
It's now 12 minutes past the hour. That's 18 minutes to in Newfoundland, and l'affaire Lindros takes another turn.
It has been quite a little process for Eric in the Quebec Nordique. 18-year-old Eric Lindros certainly opened up a can of worms when he decided he did not want to play for the team. Here's the latest. 3 MPs from Quebec are demanding that Lindros be dropped from Canada's national team. They say he does not adequately represent the country because he does not want to live in Quebec. Meantime, Hockey Canada negotiator Alan Eagleson says he will do everything in his power to make sure that Lindros stays on the team. Canada's national team will play in the Winter Olympics in February. All the criticism has not hurt Eric Lindros' performance, as we saw there in the game last night between Team USA and Team Canada. Lindros dished up a 4-point performance, 1 goal and 3 assists. Team Canada beat Team USA 6-3, and that improves their exhibition record to 29, 8, and 6. Switching to baseball now, and the Minnesota Twins may not have Jack Morris for the next season, but they do have Bob Kipper. They signed Kipper, a pitcher, to a 1-year deal, and that is worth a nice round figure, $1 million, as you can see there. Meanwhile, Jack Morris is scheduled to meet with the Toronto Blue Jays today. They have reportedly offered him a 3-year deal worth $15 million. And while we're talking contracts and such, word out of Montreal says that Canadiens coach Pat Burns is negotiating his new deal, though we haven't received any figures. Reports say it could make him the highest paid coach in the NHL. At the moment, Burns is in the 3rd year of his contract, and he's making, that's a 4-year deal, he's making about $205,000 every season. CFL, the Toronto Argos have given general manager Mike McCarthy an early Christmas present for winning the Grey Cup. That's a 2-year contract. It's worth more than $200,000 a season. That's Sports Notes, a complete scoreboard for you coming up, or a complete sportscast coming up for you in about 20 minutes. Right now, your latest scoreboard.
Well, our business commentator Pat Ballin is standing by in Toronto. We'll go to him in just a few minutes' time for a look ahead at trading on the markets today.
Yeah, and it is quite a day outside, especially in the Maritimes. A lot of snow. It looks like it sort of moved through central Canada, and we're getting it out here on the east coast. We're going to have a look at the weather forecast across the country and see how this weather is affecting the airports in the east on the CBC Morning News, live from Newsworld, Halifax.
Foreign stock markets were modestly stronger yesterday, but that enthusiasm waned in North America as the markets were closed lower. Pat Bolland is in the Business World offices in Toronto with today's outlook. Hi, Pat.
Hi, Jane.
Let's start overseas. How are markets faring in reaction to Wall Street's modest decline?
Well, Wall Street is setting the tone. Tokyo's down 106 points. Basically, the foreigners are not in the marketplace because of Christmas forthcoming, and the Japanese investors themselves are just standing aside until they can figure out what's happening there in terms of the direction of their own interest rates. Hong Kong is down 7 points. Sydney, Australia, big moves there, down 21 points. Apparently, the price of iron ore was decreased by 6%. That surprised the marketplace. That's despite the low increase for Japanese steel prices, which is where the iron ore usually goes. And that generally sent the Sydney Stock Exchange to the downside.
How did all that play in Europe? Do those markets have any other forces in play today?
Actually, we do see some forces in play in the German stock market. The German bond market's a little bit stronger, and that's got the stock market up some 13 points. But generally quiet, with London down 13 points and Paris down 3 points. And Paris is after 5 days of up, so they're just taking a little bit of profits here.
What caused North America declines yesterday?
Well, you're getting into very close to the end of the year in terms of the settlement of stocks. So you get what is called tax loss selling. People who have losses in particular stocks or who want to lock in profits for the year would begin to sell over the next 2 or 3 days to get that out of the way. In addition to that, we had IBM down, as well as Citicorp. Citicorp Bank down in the States rumored to be restructuring, the chairman possibly resigning. Here in Toronto, we just followed along in what New York was doing.
And anything of note on the debt or currency markets that we should be looking for?
Yeah, again, going into year-end, we see some movements in the Canadian dollar down about 25 cents. It was interesting, though, yesterday in the Canadian bond market, we were up. That's after a sizable $850 million auction. So there still is a considerable demand for Canadian bonds, and a worldwide perspective, the Canadian interest rates could continue to fall.
Thanks, Pat, and we'll talk to you next hour.
Thanks, Jane.
Pat Bolland, this is Business World. He joined us from Toronto. The Quebec government hopes it can breathe new life into Montreal's economy. It plans to spend $400 million over the next 5 years. Now, that sounds like a lot of money, but some people say it's just too little, too late. Ron Charles reports.
Daniel Johnson used Montreal's new World Trade Center as the setting for his announcement about the city's relaunch. The Trade Center is the perfect example of what's wrong with Montreal's economy. It's lacking major tenants. 4 decades ago, Montreal had 20% more head offices than Toronto. At the end of the 80s, Toronto had 80% more head offices than Montreal. Montreal has the highest unemployment rate of any big city in Canada, and of big cities in North America, only New Orleans has a higher unemployment rate. Daniel Johnson points to the obsolete manufacturing sector as one of the reasons for Montreal's decline. And he says another reason is the constitutional uncertainty and the flight of Anglo-Quebecers.
We believe that, for instance, the English-speaking community is a tremendous asset for the Montreal area in terms of economic development over the long term.
Johnson announced $400 million worth of measures to counter the city's decline.
We have chosen to act along 4 vectors and 4 directions. That of innovation, modernization, development of human resources, and the conquest of new markets.
Most of the money, $300 million, will go towards a new foundation called Innovatech. The foundation will help companies and universities come up with new innovative technologies. The rest of the money goes to promoting the modernization of Quebec's transportation industry, retraining of unemployed people, and better training of people in key industries, and the marketing of Montreal's products in Canada and abroad. Some business experts say that's not enough to get the economy going again.
You're going to be seeing an investment being made of about $450 million over a period of 5 years. That's a very small amount in proportion to about $25 billion that would be required to restructure the industrial basis of an area as broad as the one that has been described today by Mr. Johnson.
But some people like the plan.
I think that this plan is necessary to be more productive, to be more competitive.
But even people like Dufour, who support the plan, say it's far too vague. He says although the money is there, the government should have specified exactly which industries will benefit from it. Ron Charles, CBC News, Montreal.
And taking a look now at some of the market figures, starting with our dollar. The Canadian dollar is worth 87.28 cents in American funds. The U.S. dollar will buy $1.1457 Canadian. On the overseas markets, London's FT 100 is down 13.5 points. Tokyo's Nikkei index closed down 106.39 points, and the Dow Jones ended yesterday down 16.77 points. The TSE was down yesterday as well. TSE 300 closing down 20.97 points yesterday. Montreal's market portfolio index down 13.96 points, and the Composite index in Vancouver ended the day down 7.05 points. Gold is trading in London this morning at $357.50 in American funds, and that's unchanged from yesterday's closing figure. And in New York, the near-month contract for light sweet crude was down 31 cents to $19.45 U.S. a barrel. More business news later.
A multi-million-dollar lawsuit has been launched against McDonald's of Canada and its advertising agency. Lawyers for the 1960s rock and roll star Chubby Checker want compensation for the use of the song The Twist. The song was used in the McDonald's ad. Now, Checker didn't write the twist, but he claims that he made the song famous, and therefore he deserves compensation. A report from Beth Arrington.
They say playing music to plants helps them grow. Potato farmer Ed Tweed gave this theory a slight twist.
The ad ran 27 days in Ontario, Quebec, and Atlantic Canada. It was created to sell McTwists, a French fry product. Checker is suing McDonald's and their ad agency for $17 million. Checker's representatives say the ad uses an impersonator to sing what they call Checker's rendition of the famous hit song, The Twist.
We believe that when people hear the advertisements on the radio and television, they think it is Chubby Checker who is singing. Mr. Checker's permission was never granted. He was never compensated.
Permission to use this version of the song was secured by the ad agency Vickers and Benson. They got permission not from Chubby Checker, but from the song's composer and original performer, rhythm and blues singer Hank Ballard.
Come on, baby. Let's do the twist.
In a phone interview, Ballard told us that Chubby Checker's version of The Twist is actually a clone of his own 1958 recording. McDonald's and Vickers and Benson say if this ad sounds like Chubby Checker, it's not their concern.
deal with it.
Lawyers for Checkers say they tried to avoid a lawsuit by first contacting the parties involved.
We approached everybody up the chain, from the production house to the advertising agency and then to McDonald's. We were hopeful that it could have been resolved.
What did they say?
They said that we couldn't resolve it.
I'm Beth Harrington for CBC News.
Little twist to the story.
Oh. Coming up in just a few minutes, we have our morning look at sports, and there's some word about Eric Lindros again coming up in the House of Commons this time, because 3 MPs from Quebec are saying they don't think he should be on the Canadian national team because of his stand with the Quebec Nordique. We have that story, and
continuing Lindros affair.
Continuing Lindros affair, and today's top story as well, which is the death of Joey Smallwood at the age of 90.
That's coming up in our newscast in just a few minutes' time. You're with the CBC Morning News. And we're live from Newsworld, Halifax. See you in 2.
What do you see in the Christmas clock now, Katie?
I see Christmas morning.
Is there anything under the tree?
Oh, there is.
Is it for you?
I think there's something there for everyone.
It's the week before Christmas, and Sellers has 1/3 off selected ladies' sleep and loungewear, 20% off watches for the whole family.
Still have time for one Christmas wish, Katie.
I wish everyone has a happy Christmas like ours.
And I wish that your wish comes true.
Thursday, Donald Sutherland as Dr. Norman Bethune in a behind-the-scenes look at the making of the CBC miniseries to be shown in January.
And it's a cut. First position.
Adrian Clarkson presents Strangers in a Strange Land. Thursday.
By these standards, I guess we didn't give you that much when you were a child.
Oh, I know, Mom, I know.
Oh, we all really have it good, you know. Makes a person feel a bit guilty sometimes.
I know what you mean. That's why Dave and I cut back a bit on gifts this year, and we've put the money towards sponsoring a foster child in Africa. It doesn't cost that much through Foster Parents Plan.
Maybe we didn't do such a bad job of raising you after all.
Call Foster Parents Plan. Toll free 1-800-268-7174.
Hi. Did you get everything you wanted?
Uh-huh.
And is my Santa all spent now?
Neither physically nor financially, my dear. Actually, I'm out shopping at Shoppers Drug Mart. Quite painless.
This miniature silver-plated frame is your free Best Buy gift with a $25 minimum purchase of cosmetics or fragrances.
And what little Shoppers Best Buy did you get for me?
La 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 la.
Good morning. The man who led Newfoundland into Confederation is dead. Joey Smallwood died last night at his home near St. John's. He was 90 years old. As a young man, Smallwood worked as a union organizer and then as a newspaper reporter. But it was as a radio personality that he became known across Newfoundland. Smallwood led the campaign to join Confederation and then served as Premier of Newfoundland for 23 years. He devoted his final years to writing an encyclopedia of Newfoundland and Labrador. General Motors workers in the United States and Canada are expecting the worst today. GM will announce a restructuring that could eliminate thousands of jobs. The Detroit Free Press is reporting that plants in Texas and Ohio will be closed and that 16,000 jobs will be lost. The report made no specific reference to General Motors operations in Canada, but it is believed that a plant in Oshawa, Ontario is threatened. Yesterday, the heads of General Motors Canada and the Canadian Auto Workers Union met to talk about ways of cutting costs. General Motors operations in North America are losing more than $5 billion annually, and the Oshawa plant is 10% below target for car production. About 4,000 people work at the plant in Oshawa. General Motors wants those workers to agree to a more flexible overtime schedule. The future of the plant will be discussed again when company and CAW officials meet on Thursday. The American Secretary of State, James Baker, travels to Ukraine and Belarus today. He's touring the new Commonwealth of Independent States to better understand the changes inside the former Soviet Union. As the BBC's Ben Brown reports, some serious divisions are already appearing in the new political order.
Nursultan Nazarbayev, the leader of Kazakhstan, who Mr. Baker met yesterday, has said that he's not prepared to let Russia become the only republic with nuclear weapons, and that for the meantime, therefore, Kazakhstan will have to keep its missiles. Today, Mr. Baker moves on to two other republics with nuclear weapons, Belarus and Ukraine. Only a few days ago, there was pressure on Mr. Baker to grant American recognition of Ukrainian independence. Now Russia and Belarus want it as well. And in a sense, events here are moving so fast that the issue of recognition has become slightly academic. America supports the fledgling Commonwealth as the best way forward, and by implication, that means Washington will have to recognize the independence of the individual states within that Commonwealth. Ben Brown, BBC News, Moscow.
The second round of Middle East peace talks will end later today in Washington. Israel says its delegation will leave when today's meetings are over. Little progress has been reported in talks between Israel and delegations from Syria and Lebanon, and formal negotiations with the joint Jordanian-Palestinian team never got underway. The talks were stalled by a Palestinian demand to negotiate with the Israelis on their own rather than as part of the Jordanian delegation. No date or location have been set for the next round of talks. And back in this country, the chief of the Ganawage Reserve, Joe Norton, says he may soon be forced to step down and replace the governing band council with a more traditional form of native government. Traditionalists on the reserve near Montreal occupied Norton's office earlier this week. There have been suggestions that Norton was losing power to the group, which includes Mohawk warriors. Yesterday, Norton said he is still in control, but he said he is going to consult more often with community members, and he will help make the transition to a traditional style of government.
It's not a question of power. It's a question of responsibility and how is it going to be, how is that responsibility going to be dealt with here?
Norton's negotiations with the Quebec government on policing and on the reserve have angered many band members. It's 34 minutes past the hour, 4 minutes past in Newfoundland.
Well, you've got to have some pity for those sorry old Quebec Nordiques. They have plenty of individual talent on their team. Joe Sakic, Owen Nolan, Matt Sundin, but they continue to struggle. They have yet to win a game on the road this season, and they faced one of the best teams in the NHL last night, the Washington Capitals. Washington has the best penalty-killing record at home in the league, and this game was no exception. All three of the Capitals' goals were scored on the power play. Washington will erase a 1-0 Quebec lead in the second period. Dino Ciccarelli scoring on the rebound to tie it at 1. That was a power play goal. And 2 minutes later, they score another one on the power play. Dale Hunter tips in Kevin Hatcher's rebound, and Washington leads 2-1. Ciccarelli will salt the game away not long after. This goal, as I mentioned, also on the power play. As the Caps beat Quebec 3-1, they move back into a tie with the Montreal Canadiens for top spot in the league. Well, several Smythe Division teams saw action last night. Among them, the Canucks hosting the Red Wings. All the scoring happens in the second period. Cliff Ronning deflects a shot by Yerky Lume into the net. Detroit ties it just over a minute later. Steve Chesson with a turnaround blast from the left circle that positively freezes Kirk McLean in his skates, but that is the only goal the Wings can manage. And this is the game winner for Vancouver. Gary Valcliffe's a backhander high into the far corner. The Canucks beat the Red Wings in a close one, 2-1, the final there. Let's go on to the Jets in Calgary. Winnipeg leading 3-2. Frederick Olofsson puts the Jets ahead 4-2 with the quick wrist shot. But the Flames will catch fire. They score 5 unanswered goals in the third period. 5 goals within 5 minutes. How about this as an effort from Robert Stern, his first of 2. Then Gary Roberts comes in here, scoring his 21st of the season to tie the game at 4 apiece. And Joel Otto will put the Flames ahead, tipping in a shot at the side of the net as the Flames go on to beat the Jets 7-4. Winnipeg losing its last 3 games now, but they remain in second place behind the Canucks in the Smythe Division. Also in the Smythe, the LA Kings see some action. They host the Minnesota North Stars here. Mike Modano for Minnesota opens up the scoring, and the North Stars go ahead 2-0 in the second period as Darian Hatcher comes from behind the net and pokes in the loose puck right there. Good game by the North Stars' Darcy Wakaluk. He stops 32 shots on goal to help the North Stars' cause. The only goal he allows will be a Yari Curry, Wayne Gretzky special. Mark Tenorti pulls it out. Gretzky's there to set up Curry, and it's the only goal LA can manage. Unfortunately, the period ends with an injury to Kings goalie Daniel Berthiaume. He accidentally gets kicked in the head by Mark Tenorti. He is not seriously injured, and Minnesota beats the Kings 2-1. Look at this. Youch. Meanwhile, the Penguins were showing no mercy last night against the Sharks. They score 8 goals in the second period. Joey Mullen scoring there. And look at this move by Bob Airey. He'll step around the defenseman, gather in the puck, and score his first 2 of that game. Done. And you have to see the final goal of the second period, an unbelievably soft one by Bob Airey. Jarmo Milas gets a little upset. He says, that's enough, we're out of here. And the Penguins hammer the Sharks 10-2. There was one other game in the NHL. The Islanders doubled the Whalers 4-2. Benoit Hogue got a pair of goals for New York. Larrick Lindros put on quite a show again last night as Team Canada took on Team USA in Ottawa. Lindros had 1 goal and 3 assists. Team Canada beat Team USA soundly. 6-3 was the final there. Let's go to Winnipeg now, where Donnie Lalonde continues his successful comeback. He is the one doing all the work here. He disposed of Edmonton's Dave Fiddler with a third-round TKO. For the record, Fiddler is the number 4 ranked light heavyweight in Canada. Lalonde wants a title fight sometime early in the new year. And this is what the next issue of Sports Illustrated will look like. That magazine has named Chicago Bulls superstar Michael Jordan their Sportsman of the Year.
I was very surprised because everything's been going great for me this year, and this is like another cap on another piece of this puzzle. And it was a piece that I certainly going to cherish for a long period of time because I think it's a prestigious situation. I mean, when you look at all the other basketball players that's been involved, maybe Bill Russell, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, all the way back to Jerry Lucas. I mean, that's heavy-duty company.
Indeed it is. Michael Jordan led the Chicago Bulls to their first NBA title last spring. And that's our look at sports for this hour.
Christmas is a nostalgic time. In years gone by, tiny toy soldiers were perhaps some of the most popular presents to be found under the tree. Over the years, the popularity of the tin soldier waned and the cost of producing them actually rose. However, in Vancouver, one man is keeping his boyhood passion alive. In fact, he's turned it into a full-time hobby.
I guess there is some people that look at me as if I'm some sort of an oddball. I don't know, but it's my hobby. That's what started me off. I started looking around to see if I could buy lead soldiers, and no way could you buy them.
That was 20 years ago, and Joe Woosnam had a hankering to collect the metal soldiers he remembered from his childhood.
Always at Christmas time, the kids used to get these figures. And I, like myself, 10 minutes after we got them, they were crushed to death, you might say, under our feet after we got them out of the box, and we had a pop gun, and we'd knock the heads off of them. And I look back at that, and I say, oh, brother. But they were beautiful, lined up. But we didn't realize it as kids.
And by the time he did realize it, it was too late.
So I started phoning around to different places, and they practically laughed at me. No, you can't buy them anymore. They stopped making them.
So Joe decided he'd make them himself.
From the time you start to make a mold until completion of that mold, you're looking at possibly 3 to 4 days. And what I do is I take all these old lead weights off of the balancing weights off of car wheels and tires, and I stick them in here, and they'll melt down into, you might say, liquid form.
Now, Joe's lead melting pot wasn't working the day we dropped by, but he offered to show us the end result.
And I have to take this pair of pliers. I lift it out very gingerly because it's still a little brittle. I don't dare touch it because it's still hot. Once you get painting and you start putting in all the detail, they really turn out nice. As you notice, you have to be so careful, especially around the collar lines. Eyes are a terrible thing to have to put in. Mustaches, little badges and campaign medals. Take this brush, for instance. You can see
Just a few hairs.
just a few hairs. In fact, some brushes have one hair. Sable. When you're doing the eyes of a figure, you have to dot that eye in and do the lips. And the eye is just, oh, it's a needle point.
Now, Joe's never made a point of counting how many figures he's made. He guesses 15 or 20,000, give or take a few thousand.
I don't know about value of these things. Value to me is only what I appreciate. My kids like it. I suppose they'll get it. It'll go to them, and then from them to them, to them, to them. God knows where it'll end up. It makes you feel that your life has been useful. You've created something. You've left your mark.
Those are just fantastic. That was always one of my favorite Christmas stories, too, was the story about the little one-legged tin soldier.
Tin soldier, yes. That report was from the CBC's Kelly McClugan in Vancouver. We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back on the CBC Morning News.
Hello, I'm Mo Campbell. An automobile dealership is more than new cars and trucks. It's people. I can honestly say we have some of the finest, down-to-earth salespeople as part of the Mo Campbell family. Bill Kazmarek is one of those people. Bill offers an honest approach and friendly smile. He will show you how easy it is to become the proud owner of a brand new Lincoln Mercury car or truck.
At Mo Campbell Lincoln Mercury, people like Bill and his personal service to you, our customers, has made us #1. It's a strength we continue to build on.
When the class bell rings, your child becomes my child, too. So I'm going to do everything I can to help that kid succeed. But I can't do it all. Kids grow up so fast. We just get one chance to give them what they need. So what we give has to be the best. The best help you can give at home has always been Encyclopedia Britannica. It has a unique 4-part learning system that makes it easy to use. There's the 2-volume index for finding information fast, the 12-volume ready reference section for quick lookups, 17 volumes of knowledge in depth for complete coverage of entire subject areas, and an outline of knowledge to prepare your child for further study. Britannica is written in today's language, and thousands of illustrations make it fun to use. So it helps kids develop a lasting love of learning, and that makes a big difference in school and in their lives. This booklet will tell you more, and it's free. To get it, just call this toll-free number. Then, when you preview Britannica in your home, you also get this 3-volume desk reference set free. There's no obligation. Look, if we want terrific things to happen for your child, we've got to work together. But right now, all you have to do is make one toll-free call. Oh, there's the bell. Well, I've got a class to teach, and you've got a call to make.
For your free booklet and details on how to receive your 3-volume desk reference set, call toll-free.
One of the people who negotiated the free trade deal has accused the United States of undermining the agreement. Gordon Ritchie is now a private business consultant, and he was recently interviewed by CBC senior parliamentary editor Don Newman.
Good morning, and good morning, everybody from Ottawa. Gordon Ritchie was the Deputy Chief Negotiator for Canada during the negotiations for the Canada-U.S. Free Trade Agreement. Each year he gives an assessment of how the agreement is working. It is almost the end of year 3, and Mr. Ritchie is with me now. Good morning. Nice to see you.
Good morning. Great pleasure to be here.
Your assessment is essentially, if I can sum it up in a few words, the Americans aren't playing fair, not living up to the spirit of the agreement, perhaps not even to the letter of the agreement.
They're bending some parts of the agreement. They're breaking others.
Well, what have they broken so far? What should we have watched them break?
Well, from day one, they were in breach of the agreement because they didn't lower the tariffs on plywood that were committed to under the agreement. More recently, they've broken the agreement because of their actions on softwood lumber, where they decided, the administration itself decided to bring a case against Canada, and before even reaching its own preliminary decision, imposed penalties on lumber from Canada, which is contrary not only to the free trade agreement, but to the GATT and to other international obligations. And they've bent the agreement in areas like trade in meat, which was, you remember, free trade under the agreement, the only free trade sector under the free trade agreement for the agricultural products. And the Americans, of course, have been playing silly bugger at the border with additional phony meat inspections just to hold the stuff up. Ultimately, Canada had no choice but to retaliate and do something equally foolish on our side. They're bending the agreement on autos, where they're auditing not the American companies in Canada, but the Japanese transplants, so-called, in Canada. And they're applying interpretations of the agreement that look very much as if, when they couldn't get us to agree to restrictive rules of content in negotiation, they're going to impose them through their own selective administration. So there are a whole number of these things. And I guess the point is, one of them can be by accident. 2 or 3 can be a problem. But when there's such a pattern, it becomes systemic.
Well, the argument, though, back in the 80s, in the mid-80s, when we started on this course for a free trade agreement with the United States was, the United States is getting more protectionist. We'd better have something in place that helps protect us from their protectionism. Are we not maybe just seeing the protectionism that we had forecast, and does not the dispute settlement mechanism, which was hailed as the accomplishment of the agreement, doesn't that give us the adequate protection from some of these things?
Well, I think there are 2 points to be made. The first is that we're better with the free trade agreement than we would be without it. If we had these kind of pressures coming on without the free trade agreement, all of these disputes would be worse than they are right now. But it's not working as well as it was supposed to work. Take the case of pork. You remember that we won that case. We won it every step of the way by a unanimous decision. Binational panels of Canadian and American experts all said we were right. A binational panel of judges said we were right. But the Americans dragged their feet to the point where it took 2.5 years. So for 2.5 years, Canadian pork producers were subject to penalties, which at the end of the day was determined they should not have had to pay in the first place. So that's what I mean by not working well enough. But understand, without the free trade agreement, before the free trade agreement, those kinds of things often went on for 4 years, 5 years, 7 years. And the end result was often not a fair result from our point of view.
So, and if we're better off without the agreement, you're not suggesting we abrogate the deal.
No, I'm saying quite the contrary. I'm saying we're better with the agreement than without it.
Okay.
So I would very much regret us abrogating the deal.
But if you're, well, then what do we do, though? Because if we go to them and say, look, you're not living up to the terms of the agreement. If you want the agreement in place, you better live up to the terms of it. We're really saying either do it properly or we're not going to play. But we can't afford to do that, can we?
Well, you're right. What we're saying is, look, it's in your national interest, United States of America, to play by the rules of this game because we all benefit. The U.S. benefits as well. It's in your national interest. But if you don't, we'll have no choice but to retaliate. And the buildup of that retaliation threatens to take us on a kind of downward negative spiral of protectionism, which means we'll all be worse off.
I understand in the global context of freer trade, it's in everybody's interest to play by the rules. On the other hand, the United States is in a recession like we are. It is feeling pressured by particularly competition from Japan, also from Europe, and we get caught up in some of that. What argument can we make, particularly as the United States goes into an election year, when the Democrats are more protectionist than the Republican administration in the White House? Look, it's in your interest, President Bush, make this agreement work more fairly.
Well, first of all, it's in your interest to live up to your international commitments. It's one thing for a congressman to start pleading special interest. But when the guy who signed the deal, the President of the United States, is not prepared to insist that the U.S. respect its international obligations, they've got problems not only with Canada, but Mexico will be watching that closely. Other countries will be watching that closely. So the bottom line is that the U.S. clearly stands to benefit from a free trade arrangement, even if it does mean that their uncompetitive producers will have to step aside and let successful Canadian producers capture markets. If they're not prepared to allow that to happen, then they're not prepared to have a free trade agreement of any sort. They should never have signed one in the first place.
Well, you were an important public servant when you negotiated this agreement. You're now successful. Well, you were the deputy negotiator. That's pretty important. And you were in the public service before that. You're now a successful trade consultant. Why do you think that the Canadian government is allowing this to happen, is not taking the action that you think it should take and say, look, follow the rules?
Well, I'm not critical of the Canadian government to this point. I think it has shown great restraint in retaliating only in limited circumstances, like on meat and on plywood, and doing so in a very cautious way, because the Canadian government realizes that we do all lose if we start getting into this kind of tit-for-tat protectionism. But that being said, in 1992, there are going to be some very big disputes coming to the boil on autos, on lumber, on our most important export industries. And if the Americans continue to play silly bugger on those issues, it's going to be a very, very unpleasant year, not only for the government of Canada, but for the people of Canada.
Just in about 30 seconds, you have not been very receptive to the idea of North American free trade, including Mexico. What we see happening under the Canada-U.S. Free Trade Agreement, what does that tell you about what might happen if there is North American free trade, as Bush and Salinas were saying on the weekend they're still committed to?
Well, I think it tells us two things. One is that with that kind of atmosphere in the United States, it's not very likely that the president's going to go before the Congress with a free trade agreement. And second, the Mexicans may be thinking twice about signing an agreement with a country that doesn't fully respect its obligations.
Mr. Ritchie, good to see you. Thanks for coming in.
Always a pleasure.
Merry Christmas.
Same to you.
And that's it from Ottawa. Now back to you in Halifax.
Thanks, Don. Don Newman is CBC Senior Parliamentary Editor. He joined us from Ottawa.
The breakup of the Soviet Union has led to a crisis in that country's defense industry. The industry dominated the economy for decades, but nobody wants high-tech weaponry anymore, and the demand now is for consumer goods. So the weapons factories are having to adapt in order to survive. The BBC's Ian Breach reports.
Until the Cold War ended, 12 million people worked in the Soviet defense industry, with perhaps 40 million indirectly dependent on that sector. Workers aren't finding it easy to adapt to the inevitable changes, job losses, and the need for new expertise. This assembly shop was, until the Iron Curtain was torn apart, a top-secret, high-technology center of the Soviet defense industry. At the height of production, 150 MiG fighters a year were produced there. That figure is now down to 40, for weaponry is no longer the main business of this factory. Swords, if not literally, are being beaten into plowshares. The need to switch from military to civilian production is paramount. And at MiG, they're now making these light planes for export to Italy and Germany. In the name of free enterprise, they're exploiting the high-precision engineering skills previously dominated by the demands of the armed forces. With the Soviet countries desperately short of medical supplies and food processing equipment, they're also diversifying into those sectors. They've adapted the production lines to make, for instance, vibrating beds for Russian hospitals with a view to exporting them to Europe. It may not be the sunny side of the street just yet, but the change of mentality is clear in public sales of military trappings. It's not just memorabilia being cleared, the icons of Soviet power are being discarded. The physical manifestation of that is seen in the scrapping of tanks. Further proof that the old military order is over. There's no money to pay for it. Above the MiG factory, the firm's museum displays products into which they'd already diversified. Now the bust of Lenin stares irrelevantly down on an enterprise which has to pay its own way, entirely unsupported by anything other than its innate technical ingenuity and its ability to sell commodities that will defend not the empire, but the economy.
That report from Ian Breach of the BBC. The Soviet armed forces may be facing an uncertain future, but for some parts of the American military machine, it is business as usual. Fred Francis of NBC News reports.
Military leaders insist that despite the Soviet collapse, the Mediterranean area is the one world hotspot where a U.S. big gun presence will be needed for a long time.
I'm still waiting for the New World Order to be orderly. I'm not a real geopolitician, but I predict what I've seen in the last 25 years, a lot of turmoil.
Today, Captain Ewing's carrier, the USS America, and ships of its battle group are trying to keep pace with tumultuous times. The U.S. is still the protector of Kurds in Iraq. There's a plan to help Yugoslav refugees. Islamic fundamentalism could ignite Algeria. There is the constant Gaddafi's Libya, and Israel and the Arab states are forever a flashpoint. Military men say that the absence of the Soviets as antagonists as well as policing partners means that nothing is predictable. In fact, they don't even know if there is a Soviet Navy anymore.
For instance, for the first time in 40 years,
there is only one Soviet surface warship anywhere in the Mediterranean and the Atlantic. Analysts aren't sure whether the Soviet Navy is collapsing, regrouping, out of fuel, food, money to pay sailors, awaiting political direction, or all of the above. Here's what intelligence experts are fearful of: that Soviet military equipment may soon be affordable to even the poorest third world nations, that territorial disputes and centuries-old enmities could be settled in blood.
These are not simpler, safer times. These are perhaps times to be a little more cautious.
And time, say other defense officials, that like it or not, a U.S. warship is the patrol car keeping peace, especially in the Mediterranean. That despite the rhetoric that the family of nations can keep order, the U.S. fighter pilot and U.S. firepower is as necessary today as the cop on any beat. Fred Francis, NBC News, London.
That's our international report. We'll be back in 2 minutes with the news.
Hi. Did you get everything you wanted?
Uh-huh.
And is my Santa all spent now?
Neither physically nor financially, my dear. Actually, I'm out shopping at Shoppers Drug Mart. Quite painless.
This miniature silver-plated frame is your free Best Buy gift with a $25 minimum purchase of cosmetics or fragrances.
And what little Shoppers Best Buy did you get for me? Fa la 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 la, la 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 la.
Sunday, a CBC special presentation of the classic Anne of Green Gables.
How dare you! My mind is made up. My red hair is a curse.
Certainly have a genius for trouble.
Megan follows Colleen Dewhurst and Richard Farnsworth in the return of the beloved classic Anne of Green Gables, Part 1, on the CBC Sunday Night Movie.
$50 a week for a year buys a kid a week off the streets and a free shot at a better life. One way you can help the most, the United way.
What do you see in the Christmas clock now, Katie?
I see Christmas morning.
Is there anything under the tree?
Oh, there is.
Is it for you?
I think there's something there for everyone.
It's the week before Christmas, and only Zellers has Wonder Bra, Daisy Fresh, Warner's, Vogue, Playtex, Just My Size, all 1/3 off.
Still have time for one Christmas wish, Katie.
I wish everyone has a happy Christmas like ours.
And I wish that your wish comes true.
Serving Essex, Kent, and Lambton counties. This is CBC Television, Windsor 9.
I was born a Newfoundlander, and a Newfoundlander I have been all my life, and a Newfoundlander I will die.
The passing of a Canadian political legend, former Newfoundland Premier Joey Smallwood, dead at 90. Good morning, I'm Jane Gilbert. You're with the CBC Morning News. We're live from Newsworld, Halifax.
Good morning, I'm Jordy Morgan. Federal Fisheries Minister John Crosbie was once an ally of Joey Smallwood, and then he became a political foe. We'll talk to Mr. Crosbie in Newfoundland a little later this hour for his thoughts on Joey Smallwood. But first, our top story. Jane?
Thanks, Jordy. Joey Smallwood, the man who led Newfoundland into Confederation, is dead. The 90-year-old former premier died last night at his home. He had been in failing health, but the exact cause of death has not been disclosed. A colleague once described Smallwood as both the most loved and most hated man in Newfoundland. Dan Bjarnason takes a look at the life of one of Canada's most colorful politicians.
Joey Smallwood not only changed his beloved Newfoundland, he changed his new country. He made it larger. He was the product of the hard life of the outports, with their poverty and their isolation. Smallwood came to know a wider world when he became a union organizer on the railways, then a newspaper reporter, and then a broadcaster. Newfoundland was bankrupt in the 30s and was ruled from Britain. By 1945, both were ready for change. In a referendum, Newfoundlanders voted by only 52% to join Canada. It was a bitter campaign in which Smallwood led the Confederation forces, and to no one's great surprise, Joey Smallwood became the new province's first premier. He would go on to win 5 more elections. Industrial development, he insisted, was the key to breaking the cycle of poverty in the province. He pushed his expensive schemes, but most were disappointments. In 1971, though, the Liberal tide went out. Smallwood was defeated after 6 terms. But he never strayed far from public view. He wrote books about Newfoundland history, an ambitious encyclopedia of Newfoundland, and a book, of course, about himself. He once said, "History will remember me well because I'll write it."
I'm a proud and grateful Canadian, but I was born a Newfoundlander, and a Newfoundlander I have been all my life, and a Newfoundlander I will die.
That report from the CBC's Dan Bjarnason.
General Motors in the United States will announce plans today to cut thousands of jobs. Detroit newspapers are naming 3 American plants that are expected to be shut down. At least 10,000 jobs are expected to be cut. America's biggest car company is losing billions during this recession. Analysts are predicting the shutdown of as many as 5 plants. The head of General Motors will make the official announcement to employees in a satellite broadcast at 12:30 Eastern Time. It will be seen by General Motors employees in Canada as well. One plant will be watching with particular interest, a GM plant in Oshawa. It is also believed to be in jeopardy. The situation is so bad that the heads of General Motors in Canada and the Auto Workers Union met yesterday to try and figure out a way to save money. Jeffrey Kaufman reports.
A little bit later, thank you. GM Canada President George Peoples came to the headquarters of the Canadian Auto Workers in search of common ground. For Auto Workers boss Bob White, rarely have the stakes been so high. The issue addressed is the competitiveness of GM's Oshawa car plant. GM management is clearly frustrated.
We were encouraged early on in the summer that we would be making some progress in many of these areas. But as the fall began to unfold, our progress bogged down.
For most of this year, the Oshawa plant has failed to meet its production goals. Since last spring, GM has been pushing for the right to impose mandatory overtime when production is lost because of delays and breakdowns. It's common in GM's American plants, but the CAW is resisting. Bob White offered a compromise of voluntary overtime, but he concedes it may be too late.
The solving of this problem does not automatically guarantee that GM will put a product in the plant in 1994-95.
At stake is this assembly line in plant number 2 and the 4,200 people who make it work. GM has 4 plants like this in North America. It's anticipated that one will be closed in 3 years' time. Because Canadians produce more GM cars than they buy, there's pressure to close a Canadian plant. The competitiveness issue has added to that pressure. For CBC News, I'm Jeffrey Kaufman.
The Mohawk chief of the Ganawage Reserve near Montreal says he may resign. Grand Chief Joe Norton says it's time that the reserve return to a traditional clan government. But he says the changeover has nothing to do with the fact that angry traditionalists have barred him from his office earlier this week. Lynn Robson reports.
For the second day in a row, the barricades at Ganawage were closed, and media were warned to leave the area or else.
There'll be a lot of people coming here. There's going to be trouble if you are here. Yeah. You better please leave.
Inside Ganawage, Mohawk were feeling the tension too. The courthouse was closed, and rumors flew about who was controlling affairs in the village, the band council or traditionalists. Chief Joe Norton tried to set the record straight.
I'm talking before the press. I asked for this press conference. You were allowed to come in under my orders, under my direction. If I was not in charge, you wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be having this press conference.
But Norton is no longer the only person calling the shots in Ganawage. He says that following the events of the last 2 days, he will consult community members, particularly traditionalists, more often. Norton says the cause of recent problems in Ganawage are the fault of Public Security Minister Claude Ryan for trying to force a policing agreement on Ganawage. Ryan says that's not true. And he says the charge is a sign Norton is losing control. Joe Norton says life in Ganawagi is back to normal, and he says negotiations with the provincial and federal governments can continue, but with increased participation by traditionalist factions in the community. That may alleviate some of the tensions here, but it's left other Mohawk asking who's really in control. Lynn Robson, CBC News, Ganawagi.
Supporters of the Lubicon Indian Band in Alberta have organized a boycott of paper products made at a pulp mill owned by Daishowa. The group says that the company wants to harvest trees growing on Indian land, and it is hoped that the boycott will force the federal government to settle a land claim that has been in dispute for more than 50 years. Rick Boguski reports.
Daishowa is a giant international pulp and paper company. It operates a plant near Peace River and lays claim to 40,000 square kilometers of trees in northern Alberta. Timberland right in the heart of the Lubicon's traditional hunting territory, land the Lubicons say is theirs.
The federal government is responsible to negotiate, but the federal government doesn't listen to Indians. The federal government doesn't listen to Albertans. The federal government doesn't listen to Canadians. And our intent is to put pressure on Daishowa because the federal government will listen to Daishowa.
Because money talks?
Money talks.
We're being portrayed as villains in this dispute, which we're powerless to resolve.
Amoka says the national boycott of Daishowa's products won't hurt his company because 95% of his products are sold in Japan. But he warns this action could backfire. Daishowa says it's trying not to inflame the situation by staying out of the disputed land and logging elsewhere, at least for this logging season. But that's little consolation to these Lubicon supporters who see Daishowa as the villain and plan to make the company pay.
Rick Boguski, CBC News, Edmonton.
In Washington now, the second round of Middle East peace talks is expected to end today. Israel says its delegation will leave when today's meetings are over. The Israeli, Jordanian, and Palestinian delegations spent most of their time squabbling over one issue, and that was the Palestinian demand to negotiate with Israel alone, instead of as a part of the Jordanian delegation. Israel didn't want the talks held in Washington in the first place, and there was no agreement on when or where to convene a third round of talks. The Soviet Union, founded 74 years ago, will not exist after January the 1st, 1992. The Union will be dissolved to be replaced by the new Commonwealth of Independent States set up by Russian President Boris Yeltsin. The decision was confirmed yesterday by Yeltsin and National President Mikhail Gorbachev. Today, the U.S. Secretary of State, James Baker, will visit two founding members of the new independent Commonwealth. We get more on that from Ben Brown of the BBC.
This is almost certainly James Baker's last trip around the Soviet Union. Next time he's here, it will be called the Commonwealth of Independent States. It's why he's devoting so much time and energy to traveling in the republics which will form the nucleus of that Commonwealth. But already serious divisions are appearing between them. Nursultan Nazarbayev, the leader of Kazakhstan, who Mr. Baker met yesterday, has said that he's not prepared to let Russia become the only republic with nuclear weapons, and that for the meantime, therefore, Kazakhstan will have to keep its missiles. Today, Mr. Baker moves on to two other republics with nuclear weapons, Belarus and Ukraine, the Slavic states which helped to found the Commonwealth. Only a few days ago, there was pressure on Mr. Baker to grant American recognition of Ukrainian independence. Now Russia and Belarus want it as well. And in a sense, events here are moving so fast that the issue of recognition has become slightly academic. America supports the fledgling Commonwealth as the best way forward, and by implication, that means Washington will have to recognize the independence of the individual states within that Commonwealth. Ben Brown, BBC News, Moscow.
The president of South Korea, No Tai-woo, announced this morning that his country is now free of nuclear weapons, and he challenged North Korea to make the entire peninsula a nuclear-free zone. It's believed the United States had about 100 nuclear weapons stored in a base just south of South Korea's capital, Seoul. This morning, the announcement confirms earlier reports that Washington had pulled those weapons out of the country. Australia's Prime Minister Bob Hawke could face one of the biggest tests of his political career today. Hawke's Labour Party is trailing in opinion polls, and some of his own cabinet ministers have said publicly that he shouldn't lead the party into the next election. Today, he'll attend a critical meeting of MPs amid growing pressure to step down. We have more from Michael Pashat of the BBC.
The country's longest-serving Labour Prime Minister is being blamed for the government's apparent loss of direction. and a critical lack of personal judgment, typified by his choice of treasurer. Mr. Hawke promoted John Kerrin to the country's most influential economic post. A former farmer with the unusual hobby of hypnotizing chickens, Mr. Kerrin seemed baffled by the jargon of economics, and every time he faltered, so did the Prime Minister's own authority.
The gross share rose, what's the areas?
Soon after that performance, Mr. Hawke reshuffled his cabinet. But critics say the Prime Minister should have been the one to go. Another former Treasurer, Paul Keating, is the man waiting in the wings to attack. So far, Mr. Hawke shows no sign of budging voluntarily.
I am convinced that I have the best chance of leading Labor to victory.
The opinion polls show that Mr. Hawke is still the more popular leader, but it's his fellow MPs and not the electorate who are now deciding his fate. Michael Peshard, BBC News, Australia.
13 minutes past the hour. That's 17 minutes to in Newfoundland. Well, it seems we can continually get sports and politics conflicting when it comes to Eric Lindros.
Well, he certainly has done it again. 18-year-old Eric Lindros certainly opened up a can of worms when he decided he did not want to play for the Quebec Nordique. Here is the latest. 3 MPs from Quebec are demanding that Lindros be dropped from Canada's national team. They say he does not adequately represent the country because he doesn't want to live in Quebec. Meanwhile, Hockey Canada negotiator Alan Eagleson says he will do everything in his power to make sure that Lindros stays on the team. Canada's national team will play in the Winter Olympics in February. Well, all the criticism has not hurt Eric Lindros' performance. Team Canada hosted Team USA last night in Ottawa in an exhibition game. Lindros dishes up a 4-point performance on the night. He has a goal and 3 assists. Team Canada beat Team USA 6-3, so that improves their exhibition record to 29-8-6. Switching to baseball now, the Minnesota Twins may not have Jack Morris for the next season, but they do have Bob Kipper. They signed Kipper, who is a pitcher, to a 1-year deal. That is worth a nice round figure there, $1 million even. Meanwhile, Jack Morris is scheduled to get together with Toronto Blue Jays management today. They reportedly have offered him a 3-year deal worth $15 million. And while we're talking about contracts and stuff, word out of Montreal says Canadiens coach Pat Burns is negotiating his new contract. Though we haven't received any figures, reports say it could make him the highest paid coach in the NHL. At the moment, Burns is in the 3rd year of a 4-year contract. He's making about $205,000 a season. In the CFL, the Toronto Argos have given general manager Mike McCarthy an early Christmas present. That's a 2-year contract, and it is worth more than $200,000 a season as well. That is Sports Notes, a complete sportscast for you in about 20 minutes right now. Here's your scoreboard. Hard times are affecting food banks in St. John's, Newfoundland. We'll be having a look at that along with our business analysis from Pat Bolland in Toronto in just a couple of minutes.
And should the Olympic flame burn again in the city of Calgary? We'll find out more in our next 15 minutes. And if you're in the 3 maritime provinces, it's going to take an Olympic effort just to get to and from work. The weather's pretty bad at the moment. Lots of blowing snow to be found. Let's take a look at the forecast as we go into this commercial break.
Hey, did you get everything you wanted?
Uh-huh.
And is my Santa all spent now?
Neither physically nor financially, my dear. Actually, I'm out shopping at Shoppers Drug Mart. Quite painless.
Come into Shoppers Drug Mart for Christmas Magic 5-roll gift wrap. Best Buy priced at just $3.49.
And what little Shoppers Best Buy did you get for me?
Fa la 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 la, la 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 la.
Good morning. The continuing saga of Toronto's de Havilland aircraft manufacturing goes on. Yet another bidder has entered the fray. Pat Bolin joins us in Business World in Toronto to talk more about this. Good morning again, Pat.
Hi, Jordan.
So who's the suitor this time?
Well, this time it's a group of 7 Europeans headed by a company by the name of Promavia. Now, Promavia may not sound so familiar to you, but Promavia just won the contract to assemble jets in Saskatoon. And that's been in the news, say, a month and a half ago. In fact, we haven't talked about de Havilland since November the 11th. This is the first name that's popped up since that time. Promavia's plan is to convert the current turboprop product of de Havilland to a jet, and they would be able to get a jet off the assembly line in about 14 months.
Yeah, it seems that every bid that we've heard of includes some sort of role for government in there. Does this one?
Yeah, it seems it does. They're looking to finance about $300 million from the Ontario government in terms of the development of the and the conversion to a jet facility. Now compare the $300 million to the $1 billion in guarantees and tax incentives that were originally proposed by Aliena Aerospatiale, and you can see that the price is coming down. However, also compare that recently there's been talk of about a $49 million investment by the Ontario government with Bombardier involved. However, it's a little bit muted by what were considered loan guarantees.
Okay, where does this leave all the other bids?
Well, the original suitor, Aerospatiale and Aliena out of Europe, were shot down, so to speak, by the European Commission on trade over there. So they are out of the picture for the time being and have no interest. The front runner recently has been Bombardier. The sticking point has been about the $300 million in loan guarantees, $300 to $400 million in loan guarantees. So I guess the federal politicians thought that this might be an opening, and they approached Promavia, and Promavia has come back and countered with this proposal. The federal government the provincial government recently turned down proposals from Piper, another airplane manufacturer, to move into Ontario, saying that they were too busy on the de Havilland deal. So one would presume that this particular deal is in front of the Ontario government, as is Bombardier, and that a decision might be forthcoming in the not-too-distant future, Jordy.
Thanks very much, Pat.
Thanks.
I'm sure you'll keep following that story for us.
I'll try.
Hard times are affecting some charities in St. John's, Newfoundland. The demand for Christmas food hampers is up. Requests have doubled at some charities over the last year or so. As David Seltzer reports, churches are stretched to the limit and donations are down because of a poor economy.
350 people a day will go through. The Army is geared up to serve 2,000 needy families. Mike Mercers is one of them. He's from Bell Island, has 3 children. He's unemployed, and this is his 3rd year looking for help.
Now, last year I came over, and when I came in, I just went right on in. Right, there's no waiting at all. But there seems to be a lot more people here this year than what it was last year, right?
There are a lot more people here than last year. According to the Salvation Army, 20% more. And to complicate matters, donations are down this year.
The demand is certainly higher enough for toys, for example, that you can look around this toy room here now and you can see that we're down to the bottom, and we're having to stop packing today because we just don't have the gifts to match the families that we're getting ready for at the present time.
But they're hopeful everything will work out by the weekend. They've never been this short of toys so close to Christmas.
I've been here 7 years, and I've never seen the things as low as they are, but then the economy, everybody's hurting. But people are still pretty generous, but a little slow in giving this year.
Other Salvation Army citadels on the Avalon have been calling here for help, but this place is just barely coping with the local needs. It's a similar story at St. Patrick's Roman Catholic Church. Volunteers at their food bank are busy filling Christmas hampers. The demand is up a little, but donations are down.
I guess everyone is finding, so to speak, a pinch this time of year, so the amount of food that they are, general parishioners and that type thing are being able to donate are a bit low, too, so everyone is sort of finding it this year.
We're going to get a bit of snow.
People like Mike Mercer are thankful for the people who are able to donate. He says people like him with no work simply have no choice but to look for help. David Zelser, CBC News, St. John's.
Let's have a look at some of the markets today. The Canadian dollar is worth 87.29 cents American, with an American dollar buying $1.1456 Canadian. On the overseas markets, London's FT 100 is down 16.2. Tokyo's Nikkei index closed down 106.39. And the Dow Jones ended yesterday down just over 16 3/4 points. Here in Canada, the TSE 300 closed yesterday down just under 21 points. Montreal's market portfolio index was down 13.96, and the composite index in Vancouver ended the day down 7.05. Precious metals gold trading in London this morning at $357.50 American. That's unchanged from yesterday. And in New York, the near-month contract for light sweet crude was down 31 cents to $19.45 American a barrel. We'll have more business for you in just under an hour.
The Calgary Flame is launching a comeback. We're not talking about the NHL team. The city of Calgary will make another bid to host the Winter Olympics. The city is counting on its successful experience with the 1988 Winter Games to lure Olympic officials. Russell Outred has the details.
The Calgary Olympics were a success by any yardstick. New arenas and sporting venues were state-of-the-art. 10,000 volunteers took part, and thanks to aggressive marketing, the Games even made money.
It was good for the city the last time. It put us on the map, and it brought that volunteer base together and created a good feeling, I guess, for all Calgarians, really, and I'd like to bring that back.
The year 2002 is a long way off, but not for members of the local bid committee. That's because the Canadian Olympic Association will decide only 1 year from now which community in Canada gets to bid on those games. City Council took the first step, telling the Canadian Olympic Association to expect a bid from Calgary. There is competition from Toronto and Quebec City, but that doesn't worry the man leading Calgary's bid.
So we feel that by the time the decision's being made in 1995, that the Games in Calgary will still bring a warm and fuzzy feeling to most of the IOC members.
Council voted to back out of another bid, a bid for the Pan Am Games in 1999.
In as much as the city of Edmonton is very interested, I understand, in bidding for the Pan Am Games, that we as a city should wholeheartedly support them.
In its newest Olympic bid, Calgary will point to all the facilities, which cost almost $500 million to build, and remind everyone that it was the International Olympic Committee which described the 1988 Olympics as the best games ever. Russell Outred, CBC News, Calgary.
Winnipeg's golden boy is #1 with his fans. Last night, Donnie Lalonde successfully fought Dave Fiddler of Edmonton. It was the boxer's first fight in his hometown in a few years, and as Del Simon reports, it was as if he'd never left.
3 years ago, Donnie Lalonde returned home to a hero's welcome, even though he'd lost a major fight to Sugar Ray Leonard.
Winnipeg still loves you, Donnie.
Shortly after that, Lalonde retired.
I saw no reason to continue. I couldn't see hurting someone.
But the lure of the ring proved too much, and 17 months later, Winnipeg's golden boy was back in the ring.
I just love coming home, you know. There's nothing like being home.
Home to rekindle his career.
Well, it's good to see him come back. You know, like you had said earlier, he's been gone for 17 months, but, you know, he's always keeps himself in shape and that, and he comes back to his roots, which is good.
I haven't seen him fight for a long time, and we came in from out of town. Actually, we don't live in Winnipeg, but we've known Donnie for a while and just came in to see him fight.
Fans root for Lalonde not only because of what he does in the ring, but also for his fight against child abuse.
He's one that experienced it himself and is taking a cause and a stand against it.
I think spiritually he's in good shape, and I mean, he's up there and he's got something to fight for, and that's the little guy.
In his heyday, Lalonde's take was in the millions. For this fight, the former champion is getting $10,000.
You've got to have fights like this in order to work back to the $1 million fights. And we're not handing back the $10,000. That's fine. We'll take it.
Lalonde is using this fight as a stepping stone. He's hoping he doesn't end up like other fighters who've come out of retirement, only to discover they no longer have what it takes. Del Simon, CBC News, Winnipeg.
And coming up in a couple of minutes with sports, we're going to show you a little bit of that fight. Anyway, Donnie Lalonde won convincingly last night. So.
Yeah. And, of course, our top story this morning, Joey Smallwood has passed away in Newfoundland. The former father of Confederation was 90 years old. That tops our newscast in just a few minutes' time, but also coming up in our next 15 minutes, John Crosby joins us to take a look at Joey Smallwood's career. The CBC Morning News returns in 2 minutes.
Spirit, why are these people so unhappy? What can we do to help? Tell me.
3 words. First word, me. It's Scrooge. Second word sounds like prune. Scrooge, a prune. Scrooge approved pricing at Canadian Tire. Prices so low, even I'd approve on a huge selection of gifts. Oh, people will love it. I must Canadian Tire. I must.
Canadian Tire lets you give like Santa and save like Scrooge.
Ladies and gentlemen, Conway 20.
Take it away.
Conway 20 is #1, and no one can take it away.
Hello, darling.
KTEL International presents Conway 20, #1 hit and king of the hit. 2 great new home videos. Over 50 #1 hits and still counting.
Down and tell you all the things my woman loves to hear. And Lord, I love that lady wearing
a living legend in his own right, Conway and Loretta Lynn make up country's most popular duet. The country's #1 hitmaker.
Call him a cow.
Conway 20, #1 hit and king of the hit. 2 of country's best videos. Also look for Loretta Lynn, another country exclusive from KTEL International.
Available at Zellers, Woolco Woolworth, Kresge Kmart, and participating Canadian Tire.
Support. I've got my own bills to pay. I'll pay next month.
There's no excuse for not paying family support. But right now, fathers of over 80,000 children in Ontario owe more than $400 million in support.
I got busy. I forgot.
Pay your family support. There's no excuse not to.
Good morning. Canada has lost one of its most colorful and controversial political figures. Former Newfoundland Premier Joey Smallwood died last night at his home near St. John's. He was 90 years old. As a young man, Smallwood worked as a union organizer and as a newspaper reporter. But it was as a radio personality that he became known across Newfoundland. Smallwood led the campaign for Newfoundland to join Canada and then served as Premier for 23 years. He devoted his final years to writing an encyclopedia of Newfoundland and Labrador. The head of General Motors will announce a major restructuring today that could eliminate thousands of jobs. American newspaper reports say as many as 4 North American plants will be closed. The Detroit News says a GM plant in Oshawa, Ontario is among those to be shut down. The report says there are no plans to build cars at that plant after the 1994 model year. General Motors operations in North America are losing more than $5 billion a year. and the Oshawa No. 2 plant is 10% below target for car production. About 4,000 people would be affected. General Motors wants the workers to agree to more flexible overtime. The company and CAW officials met yesterday to discuss the future of the plant. Further talks are scheduled for Thursday. The American Secretary of State James Baker travels to Ukraine and Belarus today. He is touring the new Commonwealth of Independent States to better understand the changes inside the former Soviet Union. As the BBC's Ben Brown reports, some serious divisions are already appearing in that new political order.
Sultan Nazarbayev, the leader of Kazakhstan, who Mr. Baker met yesterday, has said that he's not prepared to let Russia become the only republic with nuclear weapons, and that for the meantime, therefore, Kazakhstan will have to keep its missiles. Today, Mr. Baker moves on to two other republics with nuclear weapons, Belarus and Ukraine. Only a few days ago, there was pressure on Mr. Baker to grant American recognition of Ukrainian independence. Now Russia and Belarus want it as well. And in a sense, events here are moving so fast that the issue of recognition has become slightly academic. America supports the fledgling Commonwealth as the best way forward, and by implication, that means Washington will have to recognize the independence of the individual states within that Commonwealth. Ben Brown, BBC News, Moscow.
The second round of Middle East peace talks will end later today in Washington. Israel says its delegation will leave when today's meetings are over. Little progress has been reported in talks between Israel and delegations from Syria and Lebanon, and formal negotiations with the joint Jordanian-Palestinian team never got underway. The talks were stalled by a Palestinian demand to negotiate with the Israelis on their own rather than as part of the Jordanian delegation. No date or location have been set for the next round of talks. Near Montreal, the chief of the Ganawagi Reserve, Joan Norton, says that he may soon be forced to step down. Traditionalists on the reserve occupied Norton's office earlier this week, and it appears he has been losing power to the group, which includes the Mohawk Warriors. Yesterday, Norton said he is still in control, but he said he is going to consult more often with community members, and he said he will help make the transition to a more traditional style of government.
It's not a question of power. It's a question of responsibility and how is it going to be, how is that responsibility going to be dealt with here?
Some band members accuse Norton of being too soft on negotiations to reduce the number of provincial police on and around the reserve. It's 34 minutes past the hour, 4 minutes past in Newfoundland.
It's not hard to conjure up some pity for the sorry old Quebec Nordique. They have plenty of individual talent on the team, and members like Joe Sakic, Owen Nolan, Matt Sundin, but they continue to struggle. They haven't won a game on the road this season, and they faced one of the best teams in the NHL last night, the Washington Capitals. All three of the Capitals' goals scored on the power play. Washington will erase a 1-0 Quebec lead in the second period. Dino Ciccarelli scores on the rebound to tie it at 1. That was a power play goal. And 2 minutes later, they score another one on the power play. Dale Hunter will tip in Kevin Hatcher's rebound, and Washington will take a 2-1 lead. And Ciccarelli will salt the game away not long after. This goal, as I mentioned, also on the power play. The Caps beating Quebec 3-1. They move back into a tie with Montreal for top spot in the league. Well, several Smythe Division teams saw action last night. Among them, the Canucks hosting the Red Wings. All the scoring happens in the second period. Cliff Ronning deflecting a shot by Jerke Lume into the net. Detroit ties it just over a minute later. Steve Chesar with a turnaround blast from the left circle that positively freezes Kurt McLean in his skates. But that is the only goal Detroit can manage. And we're going to show you the game winner here for Vancouver, Gary Volk, lifting a backhander high into the far corner. The Canucks beat the Red Wings in a close one, 2-1, the final. Let's go on to the Jets in Calgary now, and Winnipeg leading 3-2. Frederick Olofsson putting the Jets ahead 4-2 with a quick wrist shot right there, but the Flames will catch fire. They score 5 unanswered goals in the third period, 5 goals within 5 minutes, and how about that effort by Robert Stern? That's his first of 2. Then Gary Roberts comes in here, scoring his 21st of the season to tie the game at 4 apiece. And Joel Otto will put the Flames ahead. He will tip in a shot at the side of the net as the Flames go on to beat the Jets 7-4. Winnipeg losing its last 3 games now, but they remain in second place behind the Canucks in the Smythe Division. Also in the Smythe, The LA Kings see some action. They host the Minnesota North Stars here. Minnesota's Mike Modano open up the scoring, and the North Stars go ahead 2-0 in the second period as Darian Hatcher comes from behind the net here. He just reaches out and pokes in the loose puck. A good game by the North Stars. Darcy Wakaluk, he stops 32 shots on goal to help the North Stars cause. The only goal he lets in will be a Yari Curry-Wayne Gretzky special. Mark Tenorti will pull it out. Gretzky is there to set up Curry, and that's the only goal that LA can manage on the night. Unfortunately, the period ends with an injury to Kings goalie Daniel Bertillon. He accidentally gets kicked in the head by Mark Tenorti right there. He's not seriously injured, and Minnesota beats the Kings 2-1. Meanwhile, the Pittsburgh Penguins show no mercy against the Sharks, scoring 8 goals in the second period. That was Joey Mullins. Look at this move by Bob Airey, stepping around the defenseman, gathering in the puck, and scoring his first of 2 in the game. And you have to see the final goal of the second period. Unbelievably soft. Jarmo Myllys says, that's enough. Get me out of here. I'm done. The Penguins hammer the Sharks 10-2. And there was one other game in the NHL. The Islanders doubled the Whalers 4-2. Benoit Ogue had a pair of goals for New York. Well, Eric Lindros put on quite a show again last night as Team Canada took on Team USA in the nation's capital. Lindros had 1 goal and 3 assists. Team Canada beat Team USA soundly, 6-3, the final there. Let's go to Winnipeg now, where Donnie Lalonde continues his successful comeback, and he's the one doing all the work here. He disposed of Edmonton's Dave Fiddler with a third-round TKO. For the record, Fiddler is the number 4 ranked light heavyweight in Canada. Lalonde wants a title fight early next year, sometime early in the year, as I said. And this is what the next issue of Sports Illustrated will look like. That magazine has named Chicago Bulls superstar Michael Jordan their Sportsman of the Year.
I was very surprised because everything's been going great for me this year, and this is like another cap on another piece of this puzzle. And it was a piece that I certainly going to cherish for a long period of time because I think it's a prestigious situation. I mean, when you look at all the other basketball players that's been involved, you Bill Russell, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, all the way back to Jerry Lucas. I mean, that's heavy-duty company.
Indeed it is. Michael Jordan leading the Chicago Bulls to their first NBA title last spring. And that is our look at sports for this hour.
A giant of Newfoundland politics passed away last night. Former Premier Joey Smallwood was 90 years old and will not soon be forgotten on the island of his birth. He took Newfoundland into Confederation, and he served as its Premier for 23 years. He was loved and reviled during his long career, and he leaves a lasting legacy in Newfoundland. Federal Fisheries Minister John Crosbie was both a political ally and a political opponent of Joey Smallwood's. And Mr. Crosbie joins us now in St. John's, Newfoundland. Good morning, Mr. Crosbie.
Morning.
Mr. Crosbie, I wonder if you can think back to your earliest memories, if there was ever a time when you didn't know who Joey Smallwood was.
No, because I can remember listening to him when he was the barrel man. With his radio program. That would be during the war, early in the war years.
So you remember him first as the cultural figure?
Yes, well, he was telling stories about Newfoundland. Many people thought they were tall tales. We used to kid his sons about it. It's one of the things we tease them about, that their father told tall tales.
Was he responsible for encouraging you to get into politics in any way?
Well, he was a friend of my father's for a very long time. In fact, my father assisted him in some of these enterprises, like the original books of Newfoundland, and then he had a pig farm in Gander, so that they'd known one another for a long time. And I spoke to him before I ran first in municipal politics to see what he thought of that. He encouraged me to go ahead and do it. I don't think he thought I was going to do very well. I was too shy and diffident. So he said this would be a good idea to start. But he said, you don't mean to say you're interested in water and sewerage. He said, that's all municipal politics is, but it might be a good place to start.
Well, certainly it was a starting place for you. I wonder what it was like to work with Mr. Smallwood in his cabinet, first of all, as a political ally.
Well, when I joined his cabinet, he had been Premier for 17 years or a long period of time, and he was very dominant. So I found it to be difficult to operate in, because in the essential matters, economic development and other matters like that, he was completely dominant. There wasn't really much room for debate. At least that's the way I found it. And if you did question what was being done, you were looked at with suspicion, as though perhaps you're out trying to supplant Mr. Smallwood. So there's a difficult atmosphere, because by that time he was so politically diffident, and he's very strong in his views. I mean, he wanted, his weakness, I thought, in policy terms, was that he wanted development in Newfoundland, and he didn't care what the cost was. He didn't want feasibility studies, because they might show that it wasn't possible to have a third mill, and he was going to have one, third pulp and paper mill, whether it was feasible or not. So that was his approach at that time.
Well, indeed, you challenged him for the leadership back in, what was it, '69. You have since characterized that. I think you said it was a filthy campaign. It transcends dirty, was your definition of the campaign. What was he like as a political opponent?
Oh, that was a civil war. He used every bit of his political influence in order to attempt to crush you or to prevent the people from supporting you. So, you know, he was a very formidable opponent, but he was a very talented man. It's extraordinary. I saw Mr. Smallwood myself sitting in his sitting room dictating a budget speech. They used to dictate, and he would do the budget speeches. The Minister of Finance would present them. They were Joe's documents, or speech from the throne or whatever. So he spent 24 hours a day in public life and politics, planning ahead, figuring out his strategy. And so his life was all-encompassing, you know, politics. That's what he devoted his life to, and the exercise of power.
I wonder, could his style of politics survive today? And you think of the Meech Lake debate, you think of our constitutional crisis, our economic problems today. Could his style work today?
Well, it would be more difficult, because as you know, you open your mouth today, you've got all these fanatical little pressure groups, professional environmentalists or professional feminists or whatever they are, howling you down if you so much as you know, step out of line or exaggerate or attempt to get a joke or laugh. So I think that perhaps Mr. Smallwood's style would not go down well today, but in his heyday, I can remember him cutting Mr. Lesage to pieces. But somebody said that John Lesage in Quebec could strut. He's the only man they knew who could strut sitting down. And I remember Mr. Smallwood went after him over the Churchill Falls issue. It was just a marvelous thing to see what he could do when he was in full sail.
Well, Mr. Smallwood had no small ego in his own right. He had once told a friend, I believe, that he wanted to be remembered as he'd like to go down as the greatest Newfoundlander who had ever lived. Did he do that? And did he indeed leave Newfoundland a better place than he found it?
Well, I don't think there's any question about that. I mean, I think it was a question of a man and his time coming together. He knew Newfoundland intimately. He practiced all these communication skills with radio. So he was ready. And then he got his cause being Confederation. It was a remarkable testament to the stubbornness of Newfoundlanders that there was even any great debate about Confederation. I mean, here was this little province having a terrible experience during the Depression, having lost their own government, etc., tremendous poverty, and yet the majority for Confederation, with all Mr. Smallwood's tremendous talents behind it, was only 51% to 49%. So he and the cause came together. Then with the ever-increasing cornucopia programs and benefits from the mainland, he was able to establish a modern public administration, a government here, build roads, put in a proper health system, develop the university, help the educational system. So he had the resources then behind him for many years to do these things. So there's no doubt he's the outstanding Newfoundlander of this century. He would be to Newfoundland, I would say, what John A. Macdonald was to Canada.
Thank you for your time this morning, Mr. Crosby.
Pleasure.
We've been speaking with John Crosby, the Federal Fisheries Minister. He joined us from St. John's, Newfoundland.
Keeping students off frozen lakes and ponds in the cities of Halifax and Dartmouth is proving to be difficult. On Monday, a 10-year-old Nova Scotia boy died after he fell through some ice near his home. And the tragedy is especially frustrating for those who work on those lakes and ponds. Here's Glennie Langell with the report.
Despite freezing temperatures the past few days, not a lake or pond in the county is safe.
Not much ice there. But an inch and a half.
Halifax County Parks and Recreation is constantly measuring the ice, but they are frustrated that most people don't bother to check with them.
Being kids, they just will venture out on the ice. Signs don't mean anything to them. They want to test it for themselves.
In Dartmouth, the city actually posts warnings at some of the most popular skating spots. And because of the tragedy at Half Mile Lake, they're making a special effort this week to inform kids.
We want to get the message out to all of the children, and especially to the parents, indicating to keep their children off of our lakes and ponds, because they are extremely dangerous at this time.
But signs and warnings just don't seem to work. Listen to the kids.
If they think it looks safe, they'll go on it, even if there is a sign that says thin ice. It doesn't really matter.
For CBC News, I'm Glennie Langell in Halifax.
And we're going to take a short break. When we come back, our National Affairs panel joins us for our weekly look at the state of the nation.
This is the CBC Morning News, live from Newsworld, Halifax. See you in a couple of minutes.
The first time that I saw him, I knew right from the start.
This holiday season, McDonald's has a little something for someone special.
How do I show I like him?
McDonald's gift certificate.
Oh, I think that I know how.
A book of 5 for $5 with 50 cents from each book going to Ronald McDonald Children's Charities to help children in need all across Canada. With McDonald's gift certificates, you can help a charity that helps children.
I knew he always liked me.
Her husband is missing, and she is having a very tough time. I'm cold.
Bernie, I'll do the dirty work on this one.
Once they're on the move, they turn up everywhere.
It's their living.
The word's on the street. Mum PI, Mondays.
Hello, I'm Kathy Cushion for Valente Real Estate. We would like to wish you and your family a very happy holiday season. Now, the Valente Showcase is taking a short holiday vacation, but will resume on January 5th. And we invite you to tune in during the new year. In the meantime, all the best to your family from the Valente family.
Happy holidays from Valente!
In the Christmas clock now, Katie.
I see Christmas morning.
Is there anything under the tree?
Oh, there is.
Is it for you?
I think there's something there for everyone.
It's the week before Christmas, and Zellers has a Wilshire self-sharpening triple knife set with bonus paring knife, only $24.66.
Still have time for one Christmas wish, Katie.
I wish everyone has a happy Christmas like ours.
And I wish that your wish comes true.
A First Ministers meeting without Quebec's Premier Bourassa, economic stranglehold on Ontario's economy, and the Quebec law governing language and signs. Could it be repealed? Well, we thought that those were topics for our regular National Affairs panel this morning. With us from Toronto, Jack Granatstein, a history professor at York University, and in Montreal, as usual, Alain Gagnon, a political science professor from McGill University. Hello, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Let's start with the First Minister's meeting on the economy. That gets underway tomorrow. Mr. Bourassa says he's not going, though he is sending his finance minister. Jack, any surprise?
Well, I think actually it is a bit of a surprise. I suspect that when Bob Rae, for example, talked to Bourassa privately before this conference was structured, he must have had some kind of a commitment that the Premier of Quebec would attend. And his more than a little shocked response when Bourassa decided not to attend, I suspect thinks that he feels, Bob Rae feels that he's been sandbagged. And I think a lot of English Canadians are going to feel sandbagged too. Everybody knows that all across the country, in Quebec as well as in English Canada, the economy is the main problem. And here, the Premier of the second largest province decides to stay home. I think that sends the wrong message on the economy, but I think it sends a very negative message as well on the Constitution to the rest of the country.
Well, but does it send a negative message? And Alain, perhaps you can pick this up. I mean, this is about the economy and not the Constitution. Isn't that correct?
That's right. I believe that it doesn't necessarily send the wrong message. Mr. Bourassa did not really have anything to bring back on this way, in this time around to Ottawa. So why should he go? I mean, why the other premiers can meet together, perhaps come to an agreement on what the future of this country reserves at the economical level as well as at the political level. And therefore, I'm not surprised whatsoever. It allows, I think, the 9 provinces outside of Quebec and Ottawa to come together, at least on the economic front. And Quebec has indicated all along, at least the last year, a full year, that it was willing to come to terms with an economic agreement with Ottawa, and it will have to be a bilateral arrangement.
Mm-hmm. Jack,
the problem is that bilateral arrangements really can't exist on a subject like this. You can't have Quebec acting like a separate nation, at least not yet, Alain.
Well, okay, that's the view that you have and many people outside Quebec have. At the same time, I think the Quebec community believes it has an economic agenda, and if the French-Canadian society and community is to survive in North America, there are economic units that has to come along with that, and obviously it would be very important for Quebec to keep those instruments as close to their chest as possible.
Now, I want to, unfortunately, we're a bit short on time this morning, but I do want to talk about Bill 178, the law that governs language and signs in Quebec. There's word now that a Quebec Liberal committee is reconsidering that law. They're taking a look at the situation, perhaps with a view to repealing it. Alain, how do you feel about that committee?
Well, the timing is interesting because Mr. Bourassa obviously needs all the support he can obtain from the Anglophone in the province of Quebec, and as a result, I would not be surprised to see him putting forward at least some new clauses in that law that will attenuate what people have felt were very much irritant. And the sign is one of the irritants that was put forward. And the Parti Québécois appears to be on the same wavelength because they want to indicate to the rest of the world that if Quebec were to be independent tomorrow, that its own minority and the Anglophone minority will be well protected and respected. So the two, in a sense, are caught in a dilemma there that may, in fact, disturb the Quebec community, the Francophone community, to some extent. But I think people are willing to cave in on this one.
But you don't see the law itself being actually repealed, perhaps amended?
It would be amended, or it would be, I think some section of 178 would be amended, yes.
Well, Jack, how far has this law gone in contributing to a breakdown between English and French?
Well, I think it contributed very substantially. A lot of people, me included, in fact, think that the failure of Meech Lake was attributable to the sign law more than anything else. Bourassa self-destructed his own Meech Lake package. I think its repeal or its very major amendment would go a long way to sending, as Bourassa not attending tomorrow's conference sends the wrong signal, this would send the right signal to the rest of the country and the world, and I think it would be very effective. And I suppose, Alain, they'll have to call this the Mordecai Rickler Amendment.
Well, I'm not sure if we call it the Mordecai. I mean, I think he's done more damage to this to this society than he's done good. But thank God
they wouldn't have changed it.
Thank God he remains a good novelist. No, I think there's a lot of people in the province that have been speaking during the last year that there should be some changes in terms of the language law. And Mordecai Rickler simply added some frustration in the province. And in fact, he did not really help to the positive discussion on the issue. He simply inflamed the debate.
Well, what he did though was to say these things in a major American magazine, and I think that created enormous pressure.
Referring, of course, to the article that appeared in the New Yorker.
That's right.
Right. Gentlemen, I want to thank you for a brief discussion today, but good to talk to you as usual. See you next week.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye. We've been speaking with Jack Granatstein, a history professor at York University in Toronto, and in Montreal, joining us was Alain Gagnon, a political science professor with McGill University.
Well, topping our news today is the death of Joey Small at the age of 90 at his home in St. John's, Newfoundland. We've been sort of looking back at the kind of contributions he made to Newfoundland and to Canada. We'll continue doing that throughout the morning. George Boyd and Bob Sadeko are coming up in just a couple of minutes with today's top stories.
You're with the CBC Morning News live from a very snowy Newsworld in Halifax. Have a good day.
See you later.